Hi, my name's Grace Johnson. I'm the project officer for Hedgehog Street. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the project that we run, Hedgehog Street, and community conservation and how we do that through Hedgehog Street. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, we'll start with a little bit of general information about hedgehogs, moving on to more information about the project, Hedgehog Street. We'll talk a little bit about the declines of hedgehogs in the UK, the threats that they're facing, the research that we're supporting to try to look into the decline, and also how everybody can help hedgehogs as well. And finally, a few case studies so you can see how that kind of conservation works in action. So we'll start with some general information about the West European hedgehog, which is the species that we have here in the UK. So the total number of hedgehog species is debated by taxonomists, so that's worldwide. And taxonomy is basically the science of defining groups of different living things. So it's thought that the tally is somewhere between 14 and 17 worldwide, but we do have one species here in the UK, which is the Western European hedgehog. They are the only spiny mammal found in Britain. Their spines are actually made of keratin, which is the same material as our hair. So it's basically a modified version of our hair, just a harder version of that. What we mean when we say that they've changed little in the last 15 million years is that essentially they haven't evolved dramatically in that time. They've been the way that they are for a long time. And on the subject of evolution, they're actually not related to porcupines. They've evolved spines separately in a process that we call convergent evolution. And that's just where the same feature is evolved in completely separate groups. So a little bit like how bats and birds are able to fly, but they're not sort of genetically related. They're nocturnal. So of course they are asleep during the day and active at night. They eat a lot of different things. They've got a very generalist diet. So mainly invertebrates, so insects in the garden, things like beetles, earwigs, caterpillars, worms. But they also make use of other things that they come across. So potentially some carrion, fallen fruit, and often food that's been left out by people as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that more later on in the talk. They do hibernate as well. So that's from around November until March. And I've put ish in there because it does really depend on weather conditions. So if there's a really mild February, they might be active a little bit earlier than we would expect. And as you can see on the map there, at the bottom left-hand side, the species is distributed throughout Western Europe, which is a bit of a giveaway from the name of the species, the Western European hedgehog. And they do overlap with other hedgehog species more on the eastern borders of their range as well. So in terms of their cultural significance, they're a really popular animal. You know, they've got really strong public support. Everybody loves hedgehogs. They do frequently top polls of Britain's favorite wildlife species, you know, favorite mammal, all things like that. They're just really, really popular. So a fantastic species to work with as well. Interestingly, there's lots of examples of hedgehogs in ancient Egyptian artifacts and paintings. So that's more likely to be the long-eared hedgehog rather than our own West European. But it just goes to show that they've been important to people for a long time, you know, for thousands of years. The next picture that we've got there is Mrs. Tiggywinkle, of course. So again, another really popular sort of figure in you know, popular hedgehog figure. So that book was first published in 1905, and it's still so popular. It's still a real British favourite. And finally, we've got a few examples of Christmas cards there, which have hedgehogs on. But when you start looking, you can see hedgehogs everywhere. They're on cushions, mugs, stationery. You know, there's so many things with hedgehogs because they are so popular. And also I've learned more recently, there's quite a lot of references to hedgehogs in Shakespeare plays, which is very interesting as well. And my colleague Hugh Warwick's actually written a book about the sort of cultural significance and all of these types of things. And he's got a book about that, which is a really interesting read if you're more interested on that, in that subject. So a little bit about the Hedgehog Street project. I'll start with a bit of an overview. It's quite a far-reaching project, so there's a lot of different elements. A few examples are here in the pictures. It's a joint project between the People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and it was set up in 2011 in response to the hedgehog declines that had been seen. So we are in our 10th year this year, so we've got various celebrations for our 10th birthday. The pictures along the bottom there, yeah, they're just examples of the type of work that we do. So first of all, there we attend events to engage with the public and also key stakeholders, so people like developers, farmers, ecologists. Sadly, we haven't been able to do much of that in the last year, but we're hoping to hopefully get out for a few more events later this year or when we can. The next picture along there is myself and a colleague helping out with a camera trapping research project. So we do support a number of research projects trying to untangle the reasons for the hedgehog decline and look for potential solutions. In that middle picture there, that's a training course that we run. So we run a course on hedgehog ecology and land management. So that's to try to tackle habitat issues. And we get a really good mix of people attending. You know, we get ecologists, green space managers, conservation volunteers, people from wildlife hospitals. It's a real mix. In the next picture along there, we work with our MP species champion, Chris Grayling. Most recently, the work with him has been to try to increase the legal protection for hedgehogs in the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And that's through an amendment to the Environment Bill. And finally, media interviews. So we do interviews with the press and articles, and that's to raise the profile of Hedgehog Street and awareness of hedgehogs and the conservation work that we do. So really just trying to get the word out there. So that's a few of the main things that we do. We also work with a lot of local projects as well. So any sort of local community projects that are setting up, you know, we can provide help and support for them as well. So we have over 90,000 registered Hedgehog Champions and counting. We're trying to get to 100,000 in our 10th year. So if anybody's not a registered Hedgehog Champion, please do sign up. So it's free to sign up, and it gives you access to lots of online resources for engaging with neighbours and for encouraging people to get involved in hedgehog conservation. There's also a gallery on there. There's a forum, so you can ask questions and, you know, get advice from other hedgehog champions, which is really, really popular, really valuable information on there. Then we also send out a monthly e-newsletter. And as I've mentioned, we are celebrating our 10th birthday this year. So we've got a special logo designed for that, and we're doing lots of celebrations, a few different campaigns that we're running this year, to try and raise awareness and help hedgehogs as much as we can. So in terms of where hedgehogs are, that's one thing that we aim to work out with Hedgehog Street as well. So one of the aspects that we do as part of Hedgehog Street, one of the elements is the big Hedgehog Map. And through that, we collect distribution data for hedgehogs across the UK. So we ask people to log sightings when they see hedgehogs, and it tells us where hedgehogs are. Unfortunately, it's not a good way for us to measure the abundance or the number of hedgehogs, but certainly it's great for distribution and just understanding where they are in the UK. So we're asking people to log sightings, whether they are alive or if they're sadly dead, or if you've seen one on the road. All of that information does still contribute to that understanding of the distribution of hedgehogs. And so far, we've had over 100,000 records submitted since 2015, when the map was first set up. So it's growing in, you know, awareness and popularity. People are knowing that, you know, they see a hedgehog, they should put it on this map. We share that data with the NBN Atlas and various local biological record centres as well. So in terms of a little bit about how hedgehogs are doing, it's a question that we get asked a lot. Are they declining? You know, what's the picture for hedgehogs in the UK? So the State of Britain's Hedgehogs is a report that we publish every 3 years, and it just tells us about the population trends and how hedgehogs are doing. The last report was in 2018, and it showed that we've lost 50% of hedgehogs in rural areas and 30% in urban areas since the millennium. And we know that from data that's been compiled from various different surveys. So we use RSPB data, BTO data, and also the People's Trust for Endangered Species run 2 mammal surveys. So we use the data from that as well. And we've actually got a new report coming out later this year. So that'll be the State of Britain's Hedgehogs 2021. And it's going to be really interesting to have a look and actually see what, 3 years on from the last report, how the picture is looking, how the situation is for hedgehogs. So do keep an eye on the, the news and our website a little bit later on in the year for that. So why are they declining? There's unfortunately numerous threats to hedgehogs in the UK. There's different problems in different areas, rural areas versus urban areas. The first one that we've got listed there is agricultural intensification. So that's a process that's been going on for several decades. And what we have nowadays is large monoculture fields, often pesticides are used, really trying to maximize the output of the land. This unfortunately limits the insect food for hedgehogs, but also the shelter opportunities for them. It's estimated that we've lost 50% of hedgerows since the Second World War, and hedgerows are really important habitat for hedgehogs, as well as many other wildlife species. I think the name is a bit of a giveaway there. Moving on to habitat loss. Again, that's linking to the massive loss of hedgerows, but also, more and more development, increasing urbanization. There's less suitably wild and diverse areas for hedgehogs to thrive in, unfortunately. Habitat fragmentation we've got there. So even when there are suitable areas of habitats, that might be wildlife friendly gardens, parks where there are hedgerows left, they're often broken up and isolated by roads, by buildings, walls. All of these things mean that hedgehogs can't easily move through the landscape to access that potentially suitable habitat. Roadkill, this is arguably quite a major threat to hedgehogs and something that we're still investigating. There's some research going on that I'll talk about in a moment. But we're trying to understand the level of impact and potential mitigation, so how to solve that problem essentially, or certainly work towards solving it. Predation, so the main natural predator of hedgehogs in the UK is, of course, badgers. And they do often avoid areas where badgers reside. They sort of show avoidance behavior. But it's really important to bear in mind that this is a completely natural predator-prey interaction. They've coexisted for thousands of years, without either one of them going extinct. We know that the two species can thrive alongside each other where conditions are good and where there's enough insect prey for both species. Hedgehogs are also declining in areas that are characterized by low badger numbers. So actually it tells us that it's not a major factor in the hedgehog decline. And then next up, we've got garden hazards. So we've got a few examples of that along the bottom. So unfortunately, hedgehogs getting tangled in things like netting, loose netting from plants, maybe from sort of football goals, things like that. Getting tangled up, and unfortunately, with their spines, once they're tangled, they can really get into quite a knot and not be able to escape, unfortunately. Bonfires is another one. Every November we run campaigns saying, please check your bonfires. Maybe build them on the day of burning so that there's no chance for a hedgehog to move in, just to really be extremely cautious, because we put these bonfires up just before the hibernation season. So hedgehogs see a lovely big pile of logs and they think that's a perfect hibernation nest. So it's so important to be careful with bonfires. Chemicals, so increasingly people are using a lot of chemicals in their garden, to sort of keep the critters away and keep their flowers nice, but it decreases the amount of food for hedgehogs, but also we think that it can sort of indirectly poison them as well. And then the last picture there is a hedgehog and a strimmer. So rescues, every summer they see these awful injuries with strimmers and lawnmowers and things. Obviously, people aren't doing these deliberately. It's just a case of that there's not that awareness of people to just check areas. So you just go in with a strimmer, and unfortunately, these awful things can happen. So just being really careful to check areas thoroughly before going in with any equipment like this. So in terms of research, we've talked a little bit about the threats to hedgehogs, but it's important to understand how significant these are and also how they all link together and how they vary in different areas. So to that end, we support several research projects that are trying to untangle the factors behind hedgehog declines and also look at potential solutions. There's several projects going on at the moment, and even more that have gone before in recent years. So I thought I'd just highlight a couple just to give a bit of a flavour of the things that we're looking at the moment. So the first project is looking at developing evidence-based conservation strategies for urban hedgehogs in the UK. And that's one that's going on at the University of Reading with Abby Gazard, who's pictured at the top left there, doing a survey of a hedgehog under license. Abby's looking to collect evidence to demonstrate the impact of increasing garden connectivity on hedgehog movement. So essentially the impact of hedgehog highways. So one of the things that we ask people to do as part of Hedgehog Street is to put these gaps in fences to allow hedgehogs through. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Abby's looking at, how they're used and how important they are. She's also looking at why and how hedgehogs use certain gardens, so the factors behind that. And finally, she's looking at hedgehog overwinter activity in urban areas. So if we keep feeding them over winter, is that going to help them, or does it hinder the natural hibernation process? The next project is a bit of a wordy title, so untangling the roles of prey availability, habitat quality, and predation as predictors of hedgehog abundance. That's one that's going on at Nottingham Trent University. Essentially, that's looking at the relationship between badgers, hedgehogs, and their environment. And that's coming to an end soon, so we should have some interesting results from that one. And finally, there we have Lauren Moore's project. Lauren's pictured at the bottom left there. So that's looking at road impacts for the West European hedgehog, understanding the mechanisms and testing solutions. And that's another one at Nottingham Trent. So this project has a few different objectives. Lauren's going to be looking to determine the proportion of hedgehogs that are killed on roads each year. So we know that the number roughly killed on roads each year is about 330,000. But if that's out of 500,000 hedgehogs in total, it's a really big problem. But if it's out of 15 million hedgehogs, it's less of a problem. So it's really important to understand the proportion of hedgehogs that are dying on our roads to understand how crucial of an issue this is. She's also going to be looking at the factors affecting hedgehog road mortality, how roads can isolate populations and make them more vulnerable, and also the value and efficacy of tunnels under roads for hedgehogs. So there's been some research on that, so she's going to be looking into that in more detail and more specifically for hedgehogs. So in terms of ways to help hedgehogs, the good news is that there's lots of things that we can all do to help, easy, simple things. It doesn't need to be anything too complicated. The research is looking at the wider issues and analysing the decline of hedgehogs, but it's so important to bring it back to the individual and just really let people know how they can help hedgehogs and empower them to do that. So as I say, there's lots of things that people can do to help hedgehogs, and this is where Hedgehog Street comes in. So we raise awareness of these things that people can do, really small kind of simple things that are going to make a really big difference for hedgehogs. So first and foremost, hedgehog highways. So we know that hedgehogs can travel 2 kilometers in a single night, sometimes more in the active season. We also know that their habitat is really fragmented, but that they can thrive in our urban and suburban areas. So what we essentially want to do is to link gardens together so that hedgehogs can access as many gardens, parks, green spaces as possible. So essentially what the message is to put a small gap in the fence or boundary around your garden, about the size of a CD case, about 13 centimeters square. It doesn't need to be anything too big, or to dig a channel under the fence if you're not able to put a hole in the fence. That's what I've done in my own garden. And that's going to allow hedgehogs to access. And ultimately what we'd want to do is to create a hedgehog street. So making sure that all the neighbours have done that so that it creates a really nice corridor for hedgehogs to move through. In terms of other ways to help, another really important thing is to make sure that your garden is safe for hedgehogs. Unfortunately, there are a lot of hazards that hedgehogs face. So some of those were mentioned earlier. We want to make sure that ponds are safe for them. They are surprisingly good swimmers. They can swim quite well, but if they fall into a steep-sided sort of slippery pond, and they're not able to get out, it's sadly they can drown in there. So it's really important to make sure that ponds either have a shallow side, like a beach or something, so that hedgehogs can walk out if they need to, or something like what's pictured here, which is a nice little ramp that they can just climb out of. Dealing with litter and netting, so that was mentioned earlier, just making sure that if you're not using any netting in the garden, either just to tie it up or remove it completely. when it's not in use, just to make sure that hedgehogs don't get tangled in there. Going organic, that's another great thing to do for hedgehogs. So just removing any use of chemicals from your garden, just welcoming all the bugs, all the insects. Bonfires, again, another one that we've mentioned. So, really trying to avoid, any hedgehogs nesting in bonfires. So building them on the day that you're going to light them, or moving them just a few meters, just so that in that process of taking them apart and putting them back together, any hidden hedgehogs would sort of present themselves. And also to check before mowing and trimming, again, another one that we've mentioned, and really one where we see awful injuries every summer. So really, really important for that one. Even if you don't, you think, oh, I've never seen a hedgehog in my garden, it's still really important to check, because you might not know that they're there, but they are. Another way to help, this is a really nice one because it requires very little or no effort at all, which is to leave a wild corner in the garden. So essentially designate a corner of the garden, or a little patch or a strip, or however much you want, and just leave it to grow really wild. So letting the grass grow long, letting the weeds in, leaving it completely undisturbed. And what that's going to do is increase the amount of insect prey for hedgehogs. We want to make sure there's enough creepy crawlies in there for them to eat. And also that lovely long grass is going to provide nesting materials for them as well. So that's a nice low effort tip. So just leave a patch of the garden completely undisturbed. Next, food and water. So this is a really nice way to help them, and one that's going to give you a good chance of actually spotting hedgehogs in the garden, depending on where you put the food. So traditionally people have fed them bread and milk, but I think the message is really getting out there now. That's not good for them. So please don't feed them that. We recommend meaty cat or dog food, or specialist hedgehog food, which you can buy either online or in pet shops. And also shallow dishes of clean, fresh water dotted about the garden. All of that's going to be really beneficial for them, and it's going to supplement their natural diet of insects. So the next thing is homes for hedgehogs. So another really good thing that you can do for hedgehogs is to put a designated hedgehog house in the garden. So you can buy these online. There's a lot of different models, as you can see from the slide there. Excuse me. Or you can build your own. We've actually got instructions for building one on hedgehogstreet.org. If you've got some wood and a little bit of time on your hands, you can actually put one together. It's important to, there's different designs for this, but what we want to do is make sure that they're predator proof. So either making sure that there's a tunnel entrance like the one that's at the top right there, so that any foxes that come along can't sort of reach in and get to the hedgehogs, or putting a dividing wall on the inside, so there's just that little loop to get around for the hedgehogs, just to make them a bit safe. And we do know that hedgehogs use these. A lot of people who've got hedgehog houses in the garden sort of get in touch to let us know that they've seen hedgehogs using them. So yeah, it's a really nice way to help them. It'll provide a safe nesting spot for them. So in terms of community engagement, we aim to inspire and equip people to set up hedgehog streets. So that involves, speaking to neighbours, raising awareness, just generally trying to get people involved. So once you're a registered Hedgehog Champion, you'll have access to the Top Tips leaflet, which we can post out for you. That's pictured on the left there. And also lots of online resources that you can print at home. So things like posters, invitations. There's also slides and notes on there for if you wanted to do your own hedgehog talk. And the Hedgehog Highway signs, they can be bought on the PTES or BHPS websites. I think they were pictured on the Hedgehog Highway slide. That's a really nice way to just mark the Hedgehog Highway. And then if you were to move out of your house, for example, it just means that the next people coming in would know that that's why that gap's there, and just to leave it open to allow hedgehogs to continue to access. So this is a great example of a community that worked together to really help hedgehogs. So I've got two examples of sort of hedgehog projects, and this one's quite rural. It's a village in Oxfordshire, and then we've also got a more urban one to look at as well. So this is a community project that's run by the Kirtlington Wildlife and Conservation Society. And what they did is created a hedgehog superhighway. So they were able to link over 60 gardens together in the village, and that included the village pub, the church, and the school. And that created so much nice, garden access for hedgehogs. And they had a really thriving population as a result of that. They used footprint tracking tunnels to monitor activity. So that's a really nice way to monitor hedgehogs. It's a nice way to, it's a nice activity, for the moment. And they also held nature walks and talks for local residents to get them involved. Obviously, that was before there was any restrictions. And they're doing virtual talks now, I believe, as well. And what they had in the garden was what they had in the village was a lot of gardens at different levels. So what they did is put in a lot of hedgehog stairways, hedgehog ramps, a bit like these ones pictured here. I don't know if you can see on the second picture there, but there is actually a hedgehog coming down those stairs. And that just, made sure that the gardens were really accessible and suitable for hedgehogs. And they put up little notice boards, saying what they were doing and what the project was to try and get more people involved. And it's, ended up being a really successful, really popular project, and obviously great for hedgehogs as well. Another case study. So I thought it would be nice to contrast Kirtlington with a more urban project. So this is SW15 Hedgehogs, which is a group based in, as you can tell, in southwest London, around sort of Putney and Roehampton. So some of the key elements of their work are things like attending local events to raise awareness of hedgehogs and how people can help. So the founder, Jackie, is in the top right picture there with her daughter, and that's them at a local event. They've got their table, all of their hedgehog leaflets, and really just chatting to people, raising awareness. Again, this is before there was any restrictions in place. This is just back in normal life. They also organise local hedgehog surveys to monitor the population, because even though they're in quite an urban area, there are still a really good population. There is a good population of hedgehogs. And they also do a lot of work with local groups. So, scouts and guides working with kids, trying to get them enthused in the project as well. So the next case study is actually a developer. So we do work with a lot of developers as part of Hedgehog Street. So a few local ones, a few national ones. And really what we're trying to do is to ensure that new build developments are hedgehog friendly. So we launched a partnership with Bovis Homes. That was more of a BHPS partnership. That was launched the year before last year, so 2019. And they will be installing hedgehog highways in current and future developments. And they're sort of building around that as well. So they're planning to put hedgehog houses in a lot of the green spaces within developments. And that's in order to increase nesting opportunities for local hedgehogs. And they're also raising awareness of hedgehogs within the company. So they've run events and competitions for staff and their families and kids as well. So a really nice sort of all-encompassing approach. They're educating people who move into the homes, but also the staff within the organisation as well. So that's just a few examples of how this, how the community engagement all works, and that's everything from me today. But thank you very much for listening. And if you'd like any more information about hedgehogs or how to get involved, head over to hedgehogstreet.org, or you can drop us an email at hedgehogs@ptes.org. Thank you very much.